is I'm going to introduce this book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, made in 1973. Okay. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is a 1972 book written by Walter Rodney that describes how Africa was deliberately exploited and underdeveloped by European colonial regimes. This one book, listen very carefully, this one book debunks everything Thomas Sowell just said in terms of Africa. I really don't care about Europe and how it was developed. It was not the same case with Africa. See, that's the problem. In order to properly understand the historical context of pre-colonial history, enslavement, post-colonial history, neocolonialism, you have to look at it at the lens of land and resources and human labor, of course, as well too. And who benefited or who profited of the land, resources, and human labor? There's only one answer. So, in terms of colonization, this one book debunks the entire premise of Thomas Sowell. He's done. He's done. This book will make you Thomas Sowell proof in terms of colonialization. Any silly argument coming from the Republicans about colonization being good, this book will save your brain from being indoctrinated. Continuing on, one of his main arguments throughout the book is that Africa developed Europe at the same rate that Europe underdeveloped Africa. It was an unfair exchange. Let's go through a little bit of the book right here. I have in PDF form. We're just going to go through the chapters. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. So chapter 1, some questions on development. 1.1, what is development? 1.2, what is underdevelopment? Very clear and concise. Chapter 2, how Africa develops before the coming of the Europeans up to the 15th century. Let me repeat that again, nice and clear. How Africa developed before the coming of the Europeans up to the 1400s. If you know about centuries, the 15th century means it was the 1400s. So, Africa developed all the way up to the 1400s. Chapter 2, general overview, and then concrete examples. Chapter 3, Africa's contribution to European capitalist development, the pre-colonial period. How Europe became the dominant section of a worldwide trade system. That's 3.1. 3.2, Africa's contribution to the economy and beliefs of early capitalist Europe. Chapter 4, Europe and the Roots of African Underdevelopment to 1885. 1400s to 1885. So this underdevelopment was going on during enslavement and continuing on. It did not stop. 4.1, the European enslavement trade as a basic factor in African underdevelopment. 4.2, technological stagnation and distortion of the African economy in the pre-colonial epoch. 4.3, continuing political military developments in Africa, 1500 to 1885. Chapter 5, Africa's contribution to the capitalist development of Europe, the colonial period. 5.1, Exploration of African surplus under colonialism. No, sorry, expatriation of African surplus under colonialism. 5.2, the strengthening of technological and military aspects of capitalism. Chapter 6, colonialism as a system for underdeveloping Africa. 6.1, the supposed benefits of colonialism to Africa. You see, we got a whole section here dedicated to Thomas Sowell. See, Walter Rodney was ahead of his time already. We got a whole section, not even a chapter, a section dedicated to Thomas Sowell after going all through these first 5 chapters. 6.2, negative character of the social, political, and economic consequences. 6.3, education for underdevelopment. 6.4, development by contradiction. I'm just going to look at a couple pages before I finish because I think it's been thoroughly gone through. So countries per capita income in US dollars, 1968. Canada, about 2,200, 500. US, 3,500. France, 1,700. UK, 1,500. Now look at this. Africa as a whole, 1,400. This is the per capita in US dollars in 1960 or up to the year 1968. This is old data. And we could see, obviously, 1968 is a good portion of time after neocolonialism, and we can see clearly the results. Next page, final page. So no one has been able to come up with a figure representing total losses to the African population sustained through the extraction of slave labor from all areas to all destinations over the many centuries that slave trade existed. However, on every other continent from the 15th century onwards, the population showed constant and sometimes spectacular natural increase, while it is striking that the same did not apply to Africa. I wonder why. One European scholar gave the following estimates of world population in millions according to continents. So 1650, basically every century, 1650, 17, 1850, and then 1900, so they cut it off for the final one, 50 years. Africa is at a steady stagnation until 1900 and population starts to grow. Europe has steady increase. Asia has exponential increase. So Europe never stayed at 100 million. So these are in the millions. So that means in 1650, Africa was only 100 million. Throughout 3 centuries until 1900, it became 120 million. Europe grew all the way up to 423 million. Asia grew from 250 million all the way to 850 million. So, in terms of Africa and all these other countries coming out of their little phase of oppression, of colonialization, obviously the same effects or the same methods do not apply to Africa because Africa is a unique case. It is a complex case. It is a case that ran for centuries. Name a country that has been subjugated for centuries. Name one that's gone through the same amount as Africa, as the Conference of Berlin. Name a country that has went through a Conference of Berlin when European countries sat down and decided what they were going to do with that country. Name a country with a Conference of Berlin. So, two takeaways. Two takeaways. This is how the book looks. These are the various covers. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I really suggest that you go and find that book. Two takeaways. So when Republicans say that colonization was good, they're definitely trying to grift. They're definitely trying to indoctrinate you into conservatism. Colonization was not good. Africa was doing well as a continent, even as different countries, because they give lots of examples. Africa was doing very well before Europeans came. Africa did not need colonization to thrive. Africa did not need colonization to thrive at all. And number two, in terms of all these other places that went through colonization, imperialism, oppression, is not the same. It is not the same as what Africa went through. Blackness is Anti-blackness is global. Anti-blackness is a global business. That's how it should be looked at. There's something going on in the US. There's issues going on in Canada. There's issues going on in South America. There's issues in Australia. There's issues in Asia. There's issues in India. There's issues in Europe. There's issues everywhere with anti-blackness. So you can choose to go the Thomas Sowell route and say slavery was all the same, colonization was all the same, and it was a benefit because without enslavement and colonization, black and primitive people would not have been able to find a better way of life from what they were living because obviously being sovereign and controlling your own land is not worth it to Thomas Sowell. Controlling your own land, controlling your own resources.